and exploited my parents' generosity, stole cash from them, but now she's cut off and finally facing the music. So I'm 28, and I have an aunt, let's call her Sam. She has always been an absolute nightmare, flipping into meltdown mode whenever things didn't go her way or she felt even mildly offended. Imagine, this almost 70-year-old woman still throws tantrums that, honestly, rivaled the worst of my own unmedicated or improperly medicated bipolar episodes as a child and teenager. I could sit here for hours recounting stories of why she's a piece of work, but what really matters is what happened just last Monday, because for once, actions had consequences. Sam's health is terrible, so she receives disability and lives in one of those low-income apartments. For some reason, her disability payments got dropped due to a clerical error, one that could be fixed easily with a simple phone call. But Sam refuses to do it. She's not just disabled, she is, above all, spectacularly lazy. I promise, the laziness is not from her disability, that's a whole different saga. So instead of picking up a phone, she just let it slide. Meanwhile, my mother, not wanting her own sister to end up homeless and starving, started pouring more and more time and money into Sam. My parents are working hard to save for their retirement, but Sam's become practically their third dependent. Every month, they pick up her rent, gas for her car, electricity, groceries, even cigarettes. You name it, they pay for it. And each month, Sam's disability money vanishes earlier and earlier, while her demands get bigger. It was getting out of control, and I saw Sam was taking advantage of the help she knew she'd always have. I mentioned it to my mom, but just in passing. Well, last Monday, Sam turned up at my mom's house, ready to beg. She needed cat food and claimed she couldn't afford any. Could mom help, please? Here's the thing, my mom has pretty serious mobility issues right now. Something's wrong with her foot, and she can barely hobble around the house, let alone shop. She couldn't go with Sam to the store, and she didn't have cash handy. Instead, she handed Sam her debit card, laid out the rules: go to dollar store. Get food for the cat, a couple of things for yourself to eat over the next few days, and just one pack of cigarettes. That would have come to about $20 $25. But Sam, being who she is, decided that wasn't enough. No, she went to the local chain grocery store, a place where everything is insanely overpriced. She ended up spending $55. To make it better, worse, she took an extra $20 cash back without permission. When she got back and explained that she wasn't sure if the dollar store would have everything she needed, my mom was furious. Then she found out about the $20 cash Sam took for gas. That's when my mom went from furious to absolutely apoplectic. Sam spent the rest of the week begging for all the little favors she's used to: errands, money, attention, and playing the victim, claiming her feelings were hurt because mom was mad and not talking to her. But my mother just kept telling her she was still angry and needed to be left alone to cool down. So Sam's been getting nothing: no errands, no money, no attention. She can't take it. She's throwing a fit for the ages, but she bit the hand that fed her, hard, and now she's reaping the fallout. As for the cat, let me put your minds at ease, she's fine. Sam dotes on her, and raised her from a stray kitten. Her apartment complex found a whole litter without a mama. That cat is middle-aged now, sweet and safe. When, and it's when, not if, Sam finally moves into a care home, my parents will make sure of it, because this setup can't go on. The plan is to bring the kitty to my parents' house. And if, for whatever reason, they can't take her in, I'm the backup plan. Kitty will be just fine, the only one who's really not, is Sam. Update 1. So, maybe you remember my story about my aunt, let's call her Sam. For context, I'm 29, non-binary, and I'd heard from my mom that Sam stole about $50 from her. Let me clear a few things up right away. Quite a few people were concerned about my mother's leg issue, so here's what happened. She had a clot or something similar that was cutting off blood flow to her foot and part of her calf. Thankfully, they managed to get rid of it before it did any permanent damage that would have led to an amputation. She's fine now, which is a huge relief, and we're actually packing up for my parents' big move across the country when my stepdad retires this November. As for Sam's cat, don't worry. The cat ended up safe, taken in by the neighbor Sam originally got her from as a kitten. But now, to the real reason I have to talk about Sam. After she so blatantly took advantage of my mom, preying on the fact my mom couldn't even walk around her own house, let alone go to the store, my mother finally drew the line. No more rides for Sam. No more money. Sam is an adult and needed to start acting like it. At this point, the only thing Sam ever got from our household was the occasional box of food, mostly leftovers from the food bank that my fiancé and I didn't want. And still, Sam grew more demanding. Her health started failing, her mobility got even worse, and she began to weaponize that, trying to guilt my mother back into servitude. It got so ridiculous that my mom told me about a time Sam actually called her, demanding she drive 45 minutes just to help Sam get off the toilet. When my mother arrived, a neighbor had already helped her. Total waste of time and emotional energy. Eventually, Sam ended up in the hospital. I think someone called an ambulance, though I honestly don't know for sure, since my mom just said she went to the hospital. And in that moment, I felt nothing but pride for my mother. Sam called from her hospital bed, demanding my mom bring some of her things from her apartment. My mom just said okay, picked the stuff up, dropped it at hospital reception, and left. That was it. That was the last favor she agreed to do for Sam, the last bit of contact. She didn't even deliver Sam's things directly to her. Now, Sam has lung cancer. She'll be going into hospice. That's all I know and, honestly, all I want to know. This isn't news to me, my mom cut her off months ago. For all I know, Sam could be dead right now and I wouldn't have the slightest clue. If there's a funeral, I'm not going. I despise this woman. For 25 years, she made my life hell. I cut my emotional ties with her ages ago. There's nothing forcing me to keep up a relationship, not even to protect my mother anymore. For the first time in my life, I am free. I'll never have to see, hear from, or speak to Sam again. I've already routed her calls straight to voicemail and muted every text notification. It's over. My mom and stepdad will never speak to her again. Even her brother, who is awful in his own unique way, won't talk to her anymore. In the end, every bit of Sam's terrible behavior, the tantrums, the threats, the entitlement, and her unending cruelty have led her to exactly this, facing a terrible disease, alone, with no sympathy from me. Update 2. Last I heard of my aunt, let's just call her Sam for now, she was supposed to be in hospice care with lung cancer. That was only partially the truth. Somehow, Sam had managed to talk the people in charge into releasing her to in-home hospice. It didn't take much brainpower to figure out her true motivation: smoking. She craved her cigarettes so much that being in a facility, where smoking was prohibited, just wasn't an option. The neighbor next door started helping her with everything, taking care of her needs. To this day, I do not understand why that neighbor agreed. I really don't. Maybe I never will. On October 9th, everything took a turn I never expected. There was a fire at Sam's apartment. The authorities determined it started from inside her unit, and again, smoking. There really isn't any other plausible cause. Because of her, 10 people were suddenly displaced from their apartments, lives upended until everything could be repaired. Miraculously, Sam was the only casualty. After everything, her end still shocks me. She died in a fire because her need to smoke, so fierce that even being hooked up to oxygen didn't deter her. Consequences, deadly ones, and because her selfishness didn't let up, even in her final days, 10 other people lost their homes, at least temporarily. I hesitated to share this, not wanting to reveal too much about myself, but Sam didn't live in my town, she was across state lines, and authorities never released her name. So, I think it's safe. Sam was a terrible person. A damaged person, too. She died in a way that none of us could have imagined, and she could have hurt so many more in the process. And now, here I am, unsure how I'm supposed to feel about her death. Years ago, I severed any final emotional attachment to this woman. I felt relief when I finally went no contact, certain I'd never hear from her again. So why do I feel numb now? Why are my eyes damp, as if about to cry, yet with nothing but blankness inside? I can only feel sorrow for the people she harmed in her last moments, and, strangely, a sliver of sympathy for her, just because she died in such a brutal way. She's gone. I still can't quite process what I'm feeling. Relief? Maybe. Goodbye, Aunt Sue. I won't miss you, but somewhere, somehow, I hope there's a person who can say you made a positive impact in their life. I hope you can finally rest in peace, in a way less painful than you deserved. I truly am grateful she didn't suffer any more than she needed to at the end. I hated the idea of her agony, I didn't want that. I just wanted peace. For me, for everyone touched by her chaos. Oddly enough, maybe, in as much as anything to do with her could be, it feels like this was the least terrible of all possible endings. No horrifying injuries, no endless wasting away from cancer. She died in her sleep, most likely. It was still reckless, stupid, and ultimately, that recklessness killed her. Consequences. There are ordinary consequences, and then there are the kind that stick with you forever. I think Sam experienced both. I hope, wherever she is now, she's at peace, and not giving anyone else hell. Update 3. I thought the fire was the end of it. It should have been. But a week later, my phone lit up with a number from across state lines and a man who introduced himself as the investigator from the fire marshal's office asking if I was next of kin. I said no. He said, "You're the only one answering," which, unfortunately, was true. Then came the morgue, the hospital, the apartment office, the oxygen company, people who speak in scripts when the world is messy and don't know what to do with someone who says, "That woman made my life hell, but yes, I'll sign the thing so you can do your job." We authorized a county cremation. My mother wouldn't go, and I didn't blame her. I drove over with my fiancé because the county wouldn't ship across state lines without a funeral home involved and we were not opening that door. The clerk slid a too light cardboard box across the counter with her name misspelled, and I stood there holding it like a lunch I didn't order. That was Sam, apparently, 3 pounds of grit and bone and a temporary urn that said property of county coroner in block letters. I put her on the passenger side floor, buckled, because I couldn't put her in the cup holder or the trunk like a busted umbrella. We drove in silence for a bit. Then my fiancé turned on the radio because the quiet felt wrong. Before we left town, I stopped at her building because management had called about personal effects. Everyone wants you to come take the things that make them responsible go away. The manager had a folder, a small box with a warped lid, and a liability form he really wanted me to sign. I didn't. I took the folder and the box and said the estate, what estate? Could be contacted at the county courthouse, and if they wanted to sue, a stack of medical bills and ash, good luck. He tried to hand me a key and I handed it back. There's a difference between closure and walking into a room where someone died. I'll take my closure with the door shut. I opened the folder in the car. There were exactly 3 things that survived: a copy of her birth certificate, a black and white photograph of her and my mother at a summer lake before either of them knew what adulthood would do to them, and a sealed letter in my grandmother's old, looping handwriting with Sammy written on the front. The envelope had heat warped but hadn't burned. The stamp looked bubbled like a blister. I didn't want to read it because I already knew it would be a landmine. I opened it anyway, because I'm a coward about some things and stubborn about others. It was short. A page and a half of my grandmother apologizing for being tired and certain things that happened when they were kids, telling Sam she was scared of the way anger had rooted itself in her youngest child, asking her to please get help and please be kind to her sister. It wasn't a magic key. It didn't undo anything. But it was proof, in my grandmother's thin, slanted pen, that the rot didn't start with me. The box from the apartment was pathetic in a way that made my teeth ache. A ceramic cat figurine with one ear snapped off and glued back on 3 times. A lighter fused to the shape of someone's hand, you could see the impression where her thumb must have rested. A plastic rosary half melted into a prayer card. I took the cat. I left the rest with the manager because evidence and belongings and whatever else were suddenly too many hats for me to wear at once. 2 days later the oxygen company called. They wanted the concentrator back. I told them it had exploded. They said it didn't explode so much as suffer catastrophic heat damage and they'd be invoicing the family for $1,200. I said there is no family to invoice, only an estate already drowning, and if they mailed me anything I'd be sending it back with a copy of the death certificate and a letter from the fire marshal that used the words no foul play, oxygen source, and open flame. They didn't like that. They called my mother next, and she told them to pound sand. After that, silence. The neighbor, the one who had helped her with everything and took in the cat, met me in the parking lot when I came the first time. She looked like she hadn't slept, and I recognized something in her face that felt uncomfortably familiar, that mix of relief and grief that doesn't sit right anywhere. She asked, shyly, if she could have a little of the ashes to bury under the rosebush next to her door. I should have been repulsed. I wasn't. I gave her a scoop in a Ziploc because this woman had helped in the ways I couldn't, and because Sam had at least one person who had seen her at her worst and still chose to say a small prayer. She told me, quietly, that Sam had been kinder to the cats than she was to herself, and maybe that mattered somewhere. The cat twined around her legs while we stood there and meowed like she knew. We drove home with the box on the floor and the photo face down on the seat because I couldn't look at the 20-year-old versions of my mom and aunt laughing without wanting to scream. I put the ashes in the back of my closet for 2 days because I couldn't stand them on the kitchen counter, and then I knew exactly what to do. There's a stretch of creek by the old mill where my mom and her sister used to skip school and smoke, long before cigarettes became in for. It's choked with willows and duckweed, and it always smelled like wet leaves and river rock and mischief. We went at dusk. No speeches. No ceremony. Just the 3 of us and a water bottle full of fine white grit that clumped when it hit the surface and sank. My mother didn't cry. She didn't smile, she just stood with her cane and watched until the ripples flattened and said, "That's enough." And it was. The practical aftermath has been exactly as tedious and joyless as you think. Insurance adjusters want statements, the building wants someone to blame, the county wants to close a file. The fire report landed in my email like homework I never wanted, full of phrases that remain clinical so your brain doesn't fling you out of your chair. Source of ignition, smoking material, accelerant, gaseous oxygen. Contributing factors, impaired mobility. There's a sentence about a disconnected smoke alarm that made my stomach turn. 10 names blacked out. 10 lives on hold in hotel rooms and relatives' couches because one person decided a rule didn't apply to her. Consequences don't always end where the person who caused them does. They just sit there, glowing, and you hope they finally cool. I mailed the photograph to my mom. I kept the letter. I don't know if that's selfish or meaningful, it just felt like the right division. My grandmother's apology is an anchor and a curse, and I don't want it lost in a move. The ceramic cat is on a shelf in my office next to a plant I can't keep alive. It's ugly and chipped and exactly what it is. Every now and then I catch myself glancing at it and thinking, you cost me 29 years, and then I think, no. She did. I'm not absolving anyone with a trinket. I thought getting the ashes, dealing with the calls, returning to the creek would sort whatever static was left in me. It didn't, not really. Closure wasn't a bang or a bell, it was turning off my aunt's ringtone and never turning it back on. This part was just the last chore. The only moment that landed like a clean cut came a week after, when a local charity reached out about the families displaced by the fire. We sent the money I had set aside for a plane ticket I didn't take to a funeral that didn't happen. It felt more honest than flowers. Update 4. The ceramic cat jumped. That's what it felt like. I wasn't even near the shelf, just a gust from the back door, a vibration from the washer limping through a spin cycle, and then a crack sharp enough to make my spine try to leave my body. I swore, knelt, and found the ear she'd glued back on and, underneath the largest shard, a roll of bills mummified, in a brittle rubber band. Of course she'd use a cat as a bank. Of course she'd make even her kitch a trap. The money smelled like old purses and smoke. 20s, mostly, with a couple of soft, exhausted 50s that had seen bars at 2 in the morning and pockets full of lint. I counted on the kitchen table because that's where we put truths in our house. $1,460. Who knows how long it had been sitting there, listening to arguments and oxygen machines and the very thin walls between one body and another. I took it to the church 2 towns over where the displaced families were taking donated casseroles and paper towels and trying not to look like they were taking anything. The volunteer recognized my last name and decided not to say it out loud. I put the cash in a manila envelope and wrote for Building C, no strings on the front because that's what I had to give. The woman with 2 toddlers on her knees didn't look up when I slid it across the table, but the teen who'd knocked on doors the night of the fire did. He said, "Thank you," like he'd practiced it, and then told me the dog from 3B was back with its owner. I didn't know what to do with the information, so I put it in my pocket with the pen I forgot to put back. 2 days after the cat money, a courier brought me a subpoena heavy like a brick. Zoom deposition, it said, because we can't stop inventing new ways to make suffering efficient. Plaintiffs v. The property management company v. The oxygen supplier v. The estate of a woman who never paid a late fee a day in her life because she never paid anything. I put on a shirt with a collar and pointed my camera at the half of my office that didn't look like a thrift store coughed. The room on the other end was beige with hard corners. 3 lawyers and a court reporter who didn't blink. They had me spell my name 3 times. They asked how often she smoked, whether she smoked in bed, whether she'd ever set anything on fire on purpose. I said all the true things I didn't want to say out loud again. Yes. In bed. No. Never on purpose. The oxygen company's guy tried to make me say we'd warned her and she ignored us. I said we'd warned her and she ignored us and we didn't have any tools beyond that. The building's lawyer asked about the smoke alarm, and the neighbor's voice cut through on someone else's audio, unmuted by accident. It chirped for months. Maintenance had taken the battery out and written tenants responsible in pencil on the lease addendum. I watched the building's lawyer write something down and underline it 3 times. They asked me if I planned to file anything. I said no. I said I wanted them to fix whatever let 10 families lose a Tuesday night and the whole rest of their calendars. The reporter did blink then, once, like she was catching a fly. After the call, I put the head back on the cat with the kind of glue you'd use for a broken mug, pressing my thumb into porcelain until my pulse showed through. It went back on the shelf lighter than before. Things that hide money always do. The county's public administrator left me a voicemail about locating assets. Assets was a wild word for a woman who stored her cash in a hollow animal, and her apologies in a letter she never sent. There was a credit union account with $38 and a safe deposit box they couldn't open without next of kin. I drove over with that knot you get when you've sworn there are no more shoes and you hear leather creak anyway. The box was small enough I could have tucked it into my coat if the bank cameras didn't exist. Inside were 2 things, a stack of sobriety chips with years that started strong and petered out, and a Polaroid of a baby in one of those hospital hats with blue and pink stripes. The back said Little Bean 1994 in a careful hand that didn't look like my aunt's. No birth certificate. No adoption papers. Just proof of a life that touched hers for a minute and then didn't. I didn't have to like her to recognize a hole punched in a person. I took the chips and left the box empty. There's a word for that, somewhere between theft and rescue, and I'll live with whichever one fits. My mother called from their new porch the evening I got home, wind chimes clacking like teeth. She asked if I wanted the photograph back. She'd framed it, the one of 2 girls at a lake pretending the future was an optional class. I told her to keep it. She said she was going to hang it in the hallway you can't get to without going past the coat rack, and I knew what she meant. Some things you keep on purpose. Some things you keep because there's nowhere else to put them where they won't trip you in the dark. The neighbor texted a picture of the rosebush. She'd tucked the little Ziploc under the roots, and now there were 3 new buds in November like the plant didn't bother reading calendars. The cat, her cat now, had chewed one open, petal shreds everywhere, and was looking very pleased with herself, which feels correct. I wish I could say the subpoena was the final stamp and the safe deposit box was the last twist and the cat was the end of her tricks. It's never that tidy. The building sent another letter trying to seek contribution from the estate. The estate is a banker's stamp on an empty line. The oxygen company tried collections. I mailed back the same fire report with no foul play highlighted and catastrophic heat damage circled like a teacher grading a paper. Eventually the calls tapered off like a leak when you finally find the right valve. We put the spare cash into the displaced families fund until the envelope was gone and sent the sobriety chips to the local AA group with a note that said, "For newcomers who need to hold proof that people try." I kept the Polaroid. It's in the same drawer as my passport and the letter from my grandmother because there are documents you save that have nothing to do with border crossings and everything to do with where you won't go again. Update 5. The letter found me before I went looking. Not the grandmother's, this one had a state seal ghosted into the paper and an adoption attorney's name I didn't recognize. It said, in the bloodless way official words do, that a party connected to a relinquishment in 1994 had registered with the Mutual Consent Registry, and if I was the legal point of contact for the deceased birth parent, I could authorize the exchange of information. I read it twice at the sink, hands wet, because apparently my body wanted something to do while my brain tried to fold itself into a smaller shape. The email came 3 days later with a subject line that just said Bean. No hello, no preamble. They wrote like someone careful with words because words have teeth. They said they didn't want anything but health history and to know if the name on their original certificate was a lie. They attached a photo of themselves at a kitchen table with a plant in the background that was not dying. My aunt's eyes were there, only softer, like the edges had been sanded down by different hands. We met at a diner halfway between our towns because that's what you do when the middle is the safest place you can find. They ordered tea. I didn't order anything for 10 minutes and then panicked and asked for pie I didn't eat. Up close, Bean was a real name with a laugh behind it, a life, partner, dog, apartment full of thrifted chairs. They told me their adoptive mom had signed up with the registry when they turned 18 and then let it sit like a porch light. It had been on all this time, and we just never walked down that street. I brought a manila folder because apparently I can only process family as paperwork. I had the fire report because honesty is a kind of respect. I had the photograph of my mother and aunt at the lake, because joy is a thing you deserve to see. I had my grandmother's letter and the sealed one addressed to Sammy because those belonged in the conversation, whether we wanted them to or not. And tucked under all of it, the Polaroid with the hospital hat and the person who had written Little Bean 1994 in a hand that wasn't my aunt's. They touched that one last, like it might break open if they pressed too hard. We didn't make it a movie, they didn't cry like a storm. I didn't give a speech. They read my grandmother telling the youngest to get help and be kind and shook their head once, carefully, the way you do when you learn a thing you feel like you already knew. They asked if she smoked while she was pregnant and I said I didn't know and hated that I didn't. They asked if there was violence and I said yes, but I never saw her hit anyone smaller than a door. We were very clean with each other's edges. That felt like the right kind of holy. I slid the envelope with the sobriety chips across the table and said I thought they belonged to anyone who could hold them without flinching. They took one, a 5-year coin with a nick down the middle, and turned it in their palm like a compass trying to settle. I don't drink, they said, and then, after a beat, I know why that doesn't matter. They didn't want her ashes. They didn't want the ceramic cat. They didn't want a recipe or a family tree like an apology. They wanted the crooked facts. They wanted to know if their hands were going to ache when it rained and if anyone in our line died of the same things over and over. I told them about lungs and anger and how our bodies all give out in the places we push them the hardest. I told them how she loved animals more than she loved herself, and how the neighbor said maybe that mattered somewhere. When I pulled the lake photograph out they smiled without looking at me, and I watched something in their face loosen like a knot you've been picking at for years and suddenly your fingers do the right thing. We sat until the lunch crowd rolled over to early dinner and the waitress started stacking napkins like pyramids. When we stood, they took the Polaroid and the copy of my grandmother's letter and left the rest. At the door, Bean asked if my mother would ever want to meet and I said I didn't know, but I could ask. Not now, they said, later, if later feels different. We hugged like coworkers at the end of a long project. That sounds glib. It wasn't. We were both trying not to bleed on each other and still be human about it. The next morning the public administrator called to tell me there'd been a small accidental death policy attached to the credit union account, one of those freebie deals they give you when you sign up for a safe deposit box. $800 that didn't know the person it belonged to. It was made out to the estate is a ghost. The administrator said it would likely be eaten by fees and I said then let it be eaten by fees, but if anything survived, I had an address where it could do more good than a ledger. He promised nothing like a man who knows what promises cost. A week later, a check arrived from a different direction, the class action for the displaced tenants. Someone, somewhere, decided the management company had to pay something now, not later. It had my aunt's name on it and a number with enough zeros to cover 3 deposits on new apartments and a little left over for pillows. I signed again, and walked it into the charity office because I didn't trust the mail with a thing like that. The volunteer at the desk tapped the corner of the envelope twice, a little rhythm, and said she hoped I slept that night. I said I hoped the smoke alarms worked. The building sent a glossy postcard with a picture of a hardwired detector and the words "We heard you." For once, I believed someone. The neighbor sent me a video of the new sprinklers popping like weird flowers when they tested them. The cat was furious about it in a way that made the neighbor laugh so hard I could hear the phone shake. Bean texted me a photo from their apartment, the 5-year chip propped at the base of a plant with leaves as glossy as a lie. I'm going to bury it when I repot, they wrote. Something should root. I typed and deleted a dozen things and settled on, that sounds right. I thought meeting them would rearrange my insides into something less static. It didn't. Not all the way. But it did put a window in a wall I didn't know I'd been staring at for years. I can see out now, there are people there with their own weather. The ceramic cat is back on its shelf with the ear glued on again. It knows too much about impact to pretend otherwise. Sometimes I look at it and think about all the things we use to hold our secrets, porcelain, a bank box, our own bones. Sometimes I think about a baby in a stripy hat who grew into someone who orders tea and wants health history and plants things on purpose. It's not redemption. It's not even a ribbon across the top of the mess, it's a door that opened when I wasn't knocking. I'm learning to walk through those without apologizing to the air. Update 6. The notice came folded like a diner menu from a storage place 2 counties over with a name so cheerful it sounded like a dare. Past due. Lien sale pending. We show an emergency contact as, my last name. I called because ignoring it would only make the noise louder. The manager had the practiced empathy of someone who signs auctions and sympathy cards in the same handwriting. He said I could come look before they cut the lock, and if I didn't want it, they'd handle it. Handle is such a useful verb when you don't plan on touching anything. It was a midweek afternoon, air as flat as a spreadsheet. He walked me down a corridor that smelled like rubber and dust and other people's holidays. The door was the size of a garage and dented like a memory. He snipped the red tag with a flourish that meant nothing and everything, rolled it up, and the unit yawned. Not a hoarder's museum. Just the ordinary apocalypse, 3 banker's boxes, a blue tote with the lid bent, a dead vacuum that had tried and failed at its job, a fake Christmas wreath that had molted glitter into the concrete. A lawn chair with a cigarette burn right where a thigh would go. The tote had masking tape with Sam's handwriting. Kitchen, though there were no dishes, only tangled cords and a manual for a VCR that never survived Y2K. 1 banker's box said taxes. It was full of empty envelopes and rage. The last box had nothing written on it. Inside was a metal lockbox with a plastic handle and one of those little keyholes that can be opened by hope or a butter knife. The manager produced a flathead like some kind of stage magician and stepped back in case the treasure shot out. It didn't. It creaked like a throat that hasn't said sorry in a long time. Microcassette tapes nested in a row, each with a label in that same slanted hand. Dr. SSA. Mom, 2 with no label. One that said Bean in block letters, like she was trying to make the word less tender by making it square. Under them, a bank envelope gone soft with handling, a P.O. box key on a chain shaped like a dolphin, and 2 scratch-offs never scratched. The dolphin felt like a joke aimed at the wrong audience. I took the lockbox and a handful of paper that looked less like bills and more like plans that never made it to the starting line. The manager asked if I wanted the rest. I didn't. He nodded and said they'd handle it, and I said that seemed fair. There are not many people left in my life who own a microcassette player. The neighbor across the street did. He is 70 with a garage that can produce exactly what you ask for as long as you are willing to be judged gently while you use it. I gave him the elevator version and he cleaned a head with a Q-tip and gave me a pair of foam headphones that smelled like his late wife's perfume. It'll squeal at first, he warned. They always squeal. It did. The tape labeled Mom was all air for a minute and then the click of a phone picked up too late. A voice I recognized by the second word, my grandmother, thinner and older than the letter, telling the machine she'd bring soup and she loved her girls even when loving them felt like lifting weights she couldn't name. It cut off mid-sentence. The one labeled doctor was appointment times and a voice repeating side effects like a prayer to keep a person in a chair. I didn't want to play Bean because I knew it would do something to my insides that would be permanent. I played one of the unlabeled ones instead. It was all scratch and then, shockingly, my own mother's voice from 20 years ago, the way it sounded before any of it had ground itself down. Sam, pick up, please pick up, and then silence, and then my own voice, high and careful, piping, hi, Aunt Sam, it's me, and nothing else because that was all there was to say. I took the headphones off and put my forehead on the table until the world stopped trying to tilt. The tape with Bean on it had been recorded over something else. You could hear old music underneath like a ghost at another party. Then my aunt's voice, close to the microphone the way people are when they're talking to a thing instead of a person. No cigarette rasp. Younger. She said Bean's legal name, the one from the email, but she said it like it was a pet name, soft on both ends. She told a stranger about cravings and mountains she wasn't going to climb. She didn't say I love you. She didn't say I'm sorry. She said, I'm not good at this, and you didn't pick me and I don't blame you, and there's a woman with steady hands who will be better. She laughed once at herself in a way I had not heard in years. The tape clicked at the end like it wanted to keep going and couldn't. I sent an audio file in 2 sentences. I found this. Listen or don't. No expectation. I put my phone face down and washed a pan that didn't need washing. The reply came much later, 2 words that were somehow a whole map. I heard. The P.O. box was still there because the post office is one of the last places where time behaves. The clerk had to get the ladder and one of those keys that look like they eat other keys. Inside were 3 things, a stack of returned letters, torn open and taped, addressed to county agencies, a pamphlet from a birthing center that no longer exists, and a manila envelope sealed and addressed to Sammy in my grandmother's hand. Another letter to go with the one I already had. No, not a letter. A duplicate, carbon copy paper, purple ink ghosting through where the pen had pressed hard on please. She had written the same apology twice and put one in the mail and one aside like she didn't trust the post to carry all that weight by itself. I walked out of the building feeling like I was balancing 2 lives on a finger so they wouldn't touch. My mother called that night and didn't mention aches or moves or the weather. She said, I think I'm ready, in that way people talk when they've been having the conversation without you for weeks. 2 Saturdays later we drove to a botanical garden because grief behaves better when there is signage and benches. Bean beat us there by 5 minutes and was pretending to read a map. My mother had the photograph in her purse. I had rules I wasn't going to say out loud because they felt like daring fate to break them. It wasn't cinematic. It was a lawn with a heron pretending not to stare at us and a bench that wobbled and the smell of damp soil. My mother sat and kept her cane balanced on her knee. Bean sat a breath away. Up close they both had the same diagonal dimple that only shows up when you're trying not to smile. My mother took out the lake photo and then put it away again. She said the word sister like it was a bruise and then like it was a memory and then like it was just a noun. Bean told her about their dog and their job and their habit of overwatering. My mother told Bean about winter colds that always go to the chest in our family and the way we all need to watch our joints when the barometer moves. They didn't discuss forgiveness. They didn't discuss blame. They traded weather reports and recipes for keeping plants alive and names of doctors who know how to listen. When we stood, Bean asked if she could hug her, and my mother said, "I think so," and then they did, carefully, like two people proving a bridge would hold. Later, in the car, my mother stared at her hands and said, "She's got my mother's mouth when she's thinking." She didn't cry. I didn't either. The heron stalked off like it had somewhere better to be. Because nothing has the decency to happen one at a time, the debt collector found us the following week, some subcontractor the oxygen company hired who didn't read the file beyond the $sign. He called my mother at dinner and told her he could work with her if she paid today. I took the phone, wrote down his name, and told him to say the agency's postal address twice and very slowly. He said recorded line like it should make me behave. I sent a letter certified the next morning with the fire report and the language that matters, the statute that says you don't get to lean on the dead's relatives and call it work. He called again anyway. I called an attorney whose office chairs all had arms and whose voice made me believe in small machines that still function. 2 weeks later a thin check arrived with no admission in the memo line and enough zeros to feel like someone had to sit with their boss and explain why bullying doesn't pay. I signed it over to the tenant fund without even taking the envelope into the kitchen. It felt on the nose and exactly right. A local paper ran a photo of my aunt's building with new hardwired alarms blinking like eyes that finally learned how. Under it, "We heard you." The neighbor texted me a video of the test, sprinklers coughing to life, water arcing, the cat in the doorway with the flattened ears of righteous outrage. She put the camera down because she was laughing too hard to hold it steady. I keep thinking the lockbox was the last of it, that there can't possibly be another container with one more angle. And then there was a voicemail from a woman whose name I didn't know who said she used to be a nurse, that she was the one who wrote Little Bean on the back of a Polaroid because nobody should have a first photo without a name. She had found me because the adoption attorney had called her trying to check a box. She said she wasn't calling to tell me anything I didn't already know. She was calling to say my aunt tried once, really tried, to sit still in a chair in a clinic and let people help. She made it 27 minutes, the nurse said, and then she stood up and said she couldn't be in her body for one more second. I thanked her because I didn't know what else there was. She said, "It all counts," and hung up before either of us could ruin it. The metal lockbox lives on the top shelf of my closet now, empty, because I don't trust anything else to hold what was in it without dissolving. The tapes went to Bean after they said they were ready. I sent them wrapped in brown paper because a bow would have been an insult. They texted a while after midnight that they'd listened to the one with their name, then the doctor one like a palate cleanser, then mine with a little kid voice. "I'm glad you called her," they wrote, which is a thing I didn't know I was waiting to be told. The ceramic cat hasn't jumped again. The ears reattachment is holding in a way that feels like tempting fate to mention. The plant next to it is doing better. I stopped overwatering. I'm trying to learn the difference between tending and drowning. Every once in a while, the new smoke detector in our hallway chirps for reasons that have nothing to do with a battery. I get up, look at it, and it never chirps again. Maybe it's just the ductwork settling. Maybe it's a reminder. Either way, I leave the step stool out for a minute, then put it away. Some chores you can plan for. Some you don't see until you're standing under them, looking up.